"By spring, you will birth our son, the mountain man," declared to the obese girl as she lay shivering in the snow, thrown from a freight wagon like a burden too heavy to carry. Folks would have left her to freeze. But he lifted her into his arms, built a fire, and made a promise that sounded impossible. She didn't know, him didn't trust him, but he spoke with a quiet certainty, as if the child in her belly was already part of his soul. What she didn't yet understand was that the baby carried a legal claim to land more valuable than gold, a claim powerful men would kill to erase. Now, as the thaw creeps down the mountain and her belly tightens with birth pains, she must face the man who shamed her before he buries the truth for good. When spring comes, will she bring new life, or be silenced forever? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The heavy wagon wheels crunched to a stop in the deep snow, jolting Lily Mae Carson awake. Through bleary eyes, she peered out from beneath her thin woolen shawl at the white world beyond. Fat snowflakes swirled down from an iron-gray sky, already coating the rough mountain trail ahead. "End of the line for you, girl," the trader barked from his perch on the wagon seat. His weathered face twisted into a sneer as he looked down at her huddled form. "Your ma paid me to drop you near the trapper's shack, not play nursemaid." "Please, Lily," whispered one hand protectively cradling her swollen belly beneath her threadbare coat. "The storm's getting worse. Couldn't we wait?" "Ain't my problem." The trader grabbed her small leather satchel and tossed it onto the snowy ground. "Out you go. Got deliveries to make for dark." Lily's legs trembled as she climbed down from the wagon bed. The icy wind cut through her clothes like knives, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning when her mother had thrust a cold biscuit at her before ordering her onto the trader's wagon. "But where is the shack?" she asked, her teeth chattering. "I don't see any." The crack of the trader's whip cut off her words. The wagon lurched forward, leaving her alone on the mountain trail. Lily tried to take a step, but her legs gave way beneath her. The last thing she saw was the endless white of the snow as she crumpled to the ground. From his vantage point on the rocky ridge above, Silas Boone had witnessed the entire scene. His keen eyes narrowed as he watched the trader abandon the young woman to the storm's mercy. The old mountain man had been tracking the wagon's approach for the past hour, curious about who would brave these heights with snow threatening. Now he understood. Someone had sent this girl to die. Silas descended the ridge with swift, sure steps, his snowshoes leaving precise tracks in the fresh powder. As he drew closer, he could see how still she lay like a fallen bird. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, creating a stark contrast against the white ground. Without hesitation, Silas knelt and gathered her into his arms. Even through her wet clothes, he could feel how cold she was. Her face was pale as milk, with blue-tinged lips. But she was breathing shallow, rapid breaths that clouded in the frigid air. The line shack wasn't far. Silas had built it himself 5 summers ago, tucked between 2 protective bluffs that blocked the worst of the mountain winds. He carried Lily there now, his moccasined feet finding the path even in the deepening snow. Inside the shack, Silas laid her gently on his narrow bed. He quickly built up the fire in the stone hearth, adding dry pine logs until flames leaped high. Next, he heated water in his biggest pot and found clean blankets in his storage chest. As warmth filled the small space, color gradually returned to Lily's cheeks. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. She stared at the rough-hewn ceiling beams for several long moments before turning her head to look at Silas. Fear flickered across her face as she took in his appearance, the mix of native and white blood evident in his features. the gray-streaked black hair worn in 2 long braids, the buckskin clothing adorned with Lakota beadwork. But Silas had seen that look before. He kept his movements slow and deliberate as he poured hot water into a tin cup. "Drink," he said, holding the cup out to her. "It's willow bark tea. Will help with the chill." Lily pushed herself to sitting position, one arm still curved protectively around her middle. She accepted the cup with trembling hands, but didn't drink immediately. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you help me?" Silas settled onto his wooden stool near the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as he studied her face, young but marked by sorrow. Something in her reminded him of a wounded deer he'd once found in these mountains, wary but desperate for shelter. "By spring you will birth our son," he said, finally, his deep voice gentle but firm. "And I will be here." Lily's eyes widened. One hand clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But the baby isn't yours. You don't even know me." Silas only nodded, his weathered face serene. "The Creator sent me to protect you both." He gestured to her barely touched tea. "Drink now. Rest. You're safe here." Lily took a careful sip of the bitter tea. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "My mother, she said there was a trapper who needed a housekeeper, said he'd take me in, even with—" She broke off, looking down at her swollen belly. "I am that trapper," Silas said quietly, "though I never sent word seeking help." He rose and added another log to the fire. "Your mother was wrong to abandon you, but perhaps the Creator guided her hand even so, bringing you here where you were meant to be." A sob caught in Lily's throat. "How can you say that you don't know what I've done, the shame I've brought?" "I know what I see." Silas interrupted, his tone still gentle, but carrying the weight of conviction. "A child of the Creator carrying another child of the Creator, both precious, both worthy of protection." He moved to the window, watching the snow continue to fall. "The storm will last through tomorrow. Rest now. We'll speak more when you're stronger." Lily wanted to protest, to explain why she didn't deserve such kindness, but exhaustion pulled at her like a heavy blanket. The tea had warmed her from the inside, and the fire's heat was making her eyelids droop. Before sleep claimed her, she watched Silas begin to prepare a meal, his movements sure and peaceful in the firelight. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Silas moved with practiced efficiency around the small cabin, preparing a simple meal while keeping one eye on his sleeping guest. He'd hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry and added more blankets to ensure she stayed warm. The storm continued its assault outside, but within the sturdy log walls, all was quiet except for the crackling flames and Lily's steady breathing. When the broth was ready, Silas gently roused her. "You need to eat," he said, helping her sit up against the rough-hewn headboard. Steam rose from the wooden bowl in his hands, carrying the savory scent of rabbit and wild roots he'd stored for winter. Lily's lips were cracked from cold and dehydration. Her hands shook too much to hold the bowl steady, so Silas sat beside her on the bed's edge, patiently helping her sip the warm liquid. "Small tastes," he instructed. "Your body needs time to accept it." She managed several spoonfuls before turning her face away, exhausted by even this small effort. But some color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes seemed clearer as they roamed the cabin's interior. The single room was crude but meticulously maintained. Thick log walls, carefully chinked with mud and moss, kept out the bitter mountain winds. Smoked meat rabbit deer and mountain grouse hung from the sturdy rafters alongside bundles of dried herbs and roots. A collection of wooden carvings adorned the stone mantel above the fireplace, elegant animal figures and symbols that Lily recognized as native in origin. What struck her most was the quiet dignity of the space. Everything had its place and purpose, from the neat stack of firewood to the well-worn tools hanging on pegs. There was no clutter, no waste, just the essential elements of a life lived close to the land. "You carved these?" she asked, gesturing to the mantelpieces with a slight tilt of her head. Silas nodded. "My mother taught me. She said working wood helps quiet the mind." He gathered up the empty bowl and added more logs to the fire. "Sleep now. Tomorrow will be soon enough for talking." When Lily woke the next morning, pale winter sunlight was filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside wrapped in pristine white. Silas was already up melting snow in a large pot over the fire. For washing, he explained, noting her confused look. He retrieved a piece of soap and a clean cloth from a shelf, along with one of his wool shirts. "These will be warmer than your wet things." He set everything within her reach, then turned his back and busied himself at the other end of the cabin, giving her privacy to clean up and change. The simple courtesy of it, the way he offered help without making her feel helpless, the respect in his averted gaze, brought unexpected tears to Lily's eyes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had shown her such consideration. Once she was dressed in his shirt, which hung loose and warm around her frame, Silas showed her how to tend the fire properly. His large hands demonstrated the correct way to stack the logs, explaining how to ensure proper airflow. "Fire needs to breathe," he said, "just like all living things." They spent the morning by the hearth as Silas taught her to whittle kindling. He placed a small knife in her hand, showing her how to hold it safely, how to let the blade work with the wood's grain instead of fighting it. When she made mistakes, he simply nodded and showed her again his patience, seemingly endless. The day passed quietly, marked by simple tasks and few words. Silas cooked another pot of broth, adding more vegetables this time. He showed Lily where he kept the dried herbs for tea, encouraging her to move around the cabin as her strength allowed. As evening approached, another storm began to gather. Wind moaned through the mountain passes, rattling the cabin's sturdy walls. By unspoken agreement, they remained near the fire, its warmth a shield against the growing dark. "Have you—" Lily hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Have you ever been married?" Silas was silent for a long moment, his hands continuing their steady work on a piece of wood. "No," he finally answered. "Never found the right time or person." He set aside his carving and gazed into the flames. "My mother died from pox on the reservation. Father was killed defending a wagon train the same year." Lily wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the baby shift within her. "Is that why you came to these mountains? To be alone, came to escape the noise of men?" Silas said, his deep voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Too much arguing over land and gold, too many broken promises." He gestured to the window where snow was beginning to collect. "Up here I hear only God and the wind. They speak clearer than any man's laws or treaties." Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she stared down at her hands. "I've never been good at anything," she whispered. "My mother always said so. Too slow, too clumsy, too—" She swallowed hard. "Too much." Silas turned to look at her directly, his weathered face grave in the firelight. "You're still alive," he said simply. "That's proof you're strong." Lily blinked at him in surprise. No one had ever suggested she possessed strength of any kind. But as she met Silas's steady gaze, she saw no mockery there, no hidden agenda, only quiet conviction. The wind continued its wild song outside, but within the cabin's walls something shifted. For the first time in her life, Lily felt the faintest stirring of hope, not because Silas had promised to protect her, but because he looked at her and saw something worthy of protection. Here was a man who asked nothing of her, demanded no explanations or apologies for her condition. He simply offered what he had: shelter, food, knowledge, with a dignity that made receiving his help feel like participating in something sacred rather than accepting charity. As the evening deepened into night, they remained by the fire, sharing its warmth and companionable silence. Silas returned to his carving, and Lily practiced with the kindling, each small success building her confidence. The baby moved within her, active in the quiet hour, and for once she didn't try to hide it or feel ashamed. In this space, with this quiet man who spoke to God through wind and wood, she began to feel that perhaps there was room in the world for her after all. The next 3 days passed in a gentle rhythm, as the fierce mountain storm gradually loosened its grip. The constant howl of wind softened to whispers, and brief patches of pale sunlight began to pierce the heavy clouds. Inside Silas's cabin, a different kind of thought was taking place. Silas proved to be a patient teacher, showing Lily the simple but vital skills needed for mountain survival. One morning, as she complained of swollen ankles, he gathered dried roots from his stores and demonstrated how to prepare a healing tea. "Watch careful now," he instructed, crushing the woody pieces between his weathered hands. "Too much makes it bitter. Too little won't help the swelling." He showed her how to measure the roots against her palm, then add them to water that was hot but not quite boiling. Lily inhaled the earthy steam rising from her cup. "It smells like the earth after rain." Silas nodded, pleased. Good medicine often does. Later that same day, he took her outside to teach her about setting rabbit snares. The snow had formed a thick crust, making walking difficult for Lily. She struggled to keep her balance, one hand always protective over her swollen belly. Like this, Silas demonstrated his skilled hands working the wire with practiced ease. "The rabbit follows these tracks here, see. We set the snare at chest height." When Lily's cold fingers fumbled with the wire, dropping it twice, Silas simply picked it up and handed it back without comment. No scolding, no sighs of impatience, just quiet encouragement through example. In the evenings, they sat beside the crackling fire as Silas taught her to work with soapstone. He placed a small piece in her hands, showing her how to feel its weight and texture. "The stone will tell you what it wants to be," he explained, demonstrating the proper grip on a carving knife. "Don't force it, listen with your hands." Lily frowned at the shapeless rock in her palm. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "I've never been good with my hands, always too clumsy." Silas set down his own work and turned to face her. "Let me tell you something," he said, holding up his right hand. For the first time, Lily noticed that 2 fingers were missing. The ring and little finger ended at the second knuckle. "Lost these to frost my second winter up here. Bad storm, worse than the one that brought you. Thought I'd die for sure." He flexed the shortened fingers, remembering. "But I didn't. Come spring, I built this cabin with 8 fingers instead of 10. Every log, every nail. Wasn't easy, wasn't pretty at first. But I learned new ways to hold things, new ways to work." He picked up his carving knife again. Sometimes our limits teach us better ways to live. The next morning, Silas suggested a short walk to help with Lily's circulation. The day was clear and cold, the snow-covered landscape glinting like diamond dust. They made their way slowly along a packed trail, Silas slightly ahead, breaking trail where needed. Without warning, Lily's foot hit a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. She pitched forward with a cry of fear, her arms flying out instinctively. But before she could fall, Silas was there, his strong hands catching her, protecting her rounded belly from impact. The near miss left Lily shaking. Tears sprang to her eyes as the reality of how close she'd come to harming her unborn child hit her. Silas guided her to sit on a fallen log, then knelt in the snow before her. To her surprise, he began to speak in a language she didn't understand. Lakota words flowing soft and melodic in the crisp mountain air. His eyes were closed, one hand resting lightly on her belly as he prayed. Though she couldn't comprehend the words, their reverence was unmistakable. When he finished, he helped her carefully back to the cabin. That evening, as they shared a simple supper of rabbit stew, Lily found herself absently rubbing her belly and saying, "He's moving a lot tonight." Silas looked up, noting her use of he instead of the impersonal she'd used before. A slight smile touched his lips, but he said nothing, allowing her this quiet shift in perspective. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin's walls, when Lily finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her since that first night. "Why do you think this baby is yours?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the evening quiet, the words seemed to fill the room. Silas set aside his wooden bowl and was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his deep voice was gentle but firm with conviction. "I prayed for a child and a woman strong enough to carry him," the Lord answered. Lily stared at him, searching his weathered face for any sign of mockery or deception. She found none. Just that same steady certainty she'd come to know over the past days, the same quiet strength that had saved her from the storm and taught her to hold a carving knife. She looked down at her belly, seeing it perhaps for the first time, not as a mark of shame or evidence of her foolishness, but as something valuable, something precious. Silas saw purpose in her pregnancy, not disgrace. In his eyes, she wasn't ruined or worthless. She was strong enough to carry a gift he'd prayed for. The fire popped and sparked, sending up a shower of embers. Outside, the wind had died completely, leaving the mountain night still and peaceful. Lily ran her hand over the smooth soapstone she'd been working earlier, feeling its potential beneath her fingers. Perhaps, like Silas had said, she just needed to learn new ways to hold things, including herself. A week of relative peace had settled over Silas's mountain cabin. The routine of daily survival, gathering wood, checking snares, melting snow for water, had given Lily's days a steady purpose she'd never known before. But that tranquility shattered one afternoon, when Silas returned from checking his trap lines, his leather bag bulging with more than just pelts. The cabin door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air along with Silas's broad frame. Snow dusted his shoulders and the brim of his worn hat. He stamped his boots clean and hung his heavy coat by the fire before reaching into his bag. "Mail came through," he said, "producing several folded papers ones for you." Lily looked up from where she sat, working on her soapstone carving, surprise evident on her face. "For me, but nobody knows I'm here." Silas handed her an envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. "Your sister looks like—" Lily's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Her older sister Rose's neat script filled the page, bringing with it memories of home that made her throat tight. But as she read, the color drained from her face. "What is it?" Silas asked, noting her distress. "It's about Colton Graves." Lily whispered, the paper crinkling in her grip. "He's running for mayor of Silver Creek." She swallowed hard before continuing. "And he's planning a new mining operation on Lakota land." Silas's weathered face grew still like the mountain before a storm. He pulled up a chair and sat, his dark eyes fixed on Lily. "Tell me about Graves," he said quietly. Lily stared into the fire, shame coloring her cheeks. "He's the mine baron's son, educated in Denver. Everyone in town thought he was courting Magnolia Maggie, the banker's daughter." Her voice grew smaller. "But he noticed me too, or pretended to." Silas remained silent, letting her find the words at her own pace. "He would leave notes asking me to meet him behind the mercantile. After dark, said I was special, different from the other girls." Lily's fingers twisted in her skirt. "I believed him. Thought maybe someone finally saw past how I looked." A bitter laugh escaped her. "When I told him about the baby, He acted like he'd never even spoken to me before. The next day, he was officially engaged to Maggie. Tears rolled down her cheeks now. 2 days later, my mother called me into her room. She had a handful of banknotes, more money than I'd ever seen, said Nathaniel had solved the problem. She'd arranged for me to disappear, said it was for the best. The fire popped and hissed in the silence that followed. Silas's jaw was tight, a muscle working in his cheek. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but Lily could hear the anger beneath it. "The Landgrave's wants," he said, rising to retrieve something from his trunk. "It's protected." He returned with a worn leather folder full of papers. "There's a treaty recognizes the rights of descendants of mixed lineage as stewards of the land." Lily watched as he spread several documents on the table. "What does that mean?" Silas's fingers traced to the formal text. "It means if your child Graves's son is born healthy, and his name recorded in time, he can claim legal rights to both water and land." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Enough rights to block the mine." Lily's hand went to her belly, understanding dawning. "That's why you—" she began. Silas nodded. "When I found you in that storm, I'd already sent letters to Reverend Amos Caldwell, and the county clerk been corresponding with them for months about the treaty provisions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You weren't the only one the Lord prepared." "But why didn't you tell me this before?" Lily asked. "Needed you to trust first," Silas replied simply. "Trust yourself. Trust that you and this child matter. Not just for mining rights, but because every life is sacred." The weight of it all settled over Lily like a heavy blanket. Her baby, the child she'd been taught to view as a shame to be hidden, could be the key to protecting land that had been promised to Silas's people. The simple mountain man who'd saved her from the snow had been preparing for this moment long before she arrived. Evening crept in as they sat with this new understanding. Silas moved to the corner where he kept his tools and took up his hatchet and whetstone. The steady rhythm of steel on stone filled the cabin as he worked, his eyes fixed on the snow falling outside the window. Lily watched him from her place by the fire, one hand resting protective over her rounded belly. The child within kicked strongly, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. She thought of Colton Graves in his fine clothes making plans to tear up this mountain for profit. Then she looked at Silas, whose quiet strength had shown her what real dignity looked like. The hatchet's blade gleamed in the firelight as Silas tested its edge with his thumb. The sound of the whetstone resumed steady and sure, like a promise being made to the falling snow. The morning sun cast long shadows through the frost-covered windows as Silas spread papers across the wooden table. His weathered hands sorted through documents, checking and rechecking each detail with careful precision. Lily watched from her seat by the fire, her fingers working a piece of soapstone. "I need to ride to the agency clerk," Silas announced, folding the papers into his leather satchel. "It's 10 miles east. 2 days' journey in this weather." Lily's hand stilled. 2 days, Silas nodded, pulling on his heavy coat. "Need a witness signature. Can't file the treaty claim without it." He moved to the woodpile, stacking extra logs near the hearth. "Keep the fire strong. Bank it at night so the coals last till morning." Lily followed him as he checked the cabin's provisions. Her heart quickened at the thought of being alone, but she kept her voice steady. "I remember how." Silas tested the door's heavy wooden bar. "Use this. Don't open for anyone." He paused, studying her face. "You'll be safe here. The storm's past and nobody travels these heights in winter without good reason." Before leaving, Silas showed her where he kept his spare revolver, though they both knew she'd never fired one. The weight of it felt foreign in her hands. "Just having it close gives courage," he said quietly. Lily stood in the doorway as Silas mounted his horse, watching until rider and mount disappeared into the white landscape. The silence that followed felt heavier than any snowfall. Back inside, she added wood to the fire and tried to settle her nerves. The cabin seemed larger without Silas's steady presence. Wind whistled through the log chinks, making shadows dance on the walls. To keep her mind occupied, she retrieved a small leather-bound book Silas had given her for practicing her letters. Instead of writing exercises, she found herself pouring out her fears onto the blank pages. Words about Nathaniel's betrayal, her mother's coldness, the shame she'd carried for so long. But other words came too. About Silas's kindness, the peace she'd found in these mountains, and the growing hope she felt for her child's future. As afternoon light faded, Lily took up her charcoal stick and began sketching in the journal's margins. First, just simple shapes, what she imagined her baby's tiny hands might look like the curve of a small cheek. The images were crude, but filled with longing and love. That evening, while searching for more kindling, she discovered a box of fabric scraps tucked away in Silas's storage trunk. Years of living alone had taught him to save everything useful. Worn shirts, old blankets, even trading post-grain sacks. The varied textures and faded colors gave her an idea. By lamplight, Lily sorted the scraps into piles. Her mother had taught her basic quilting before everything went wrong. Now those skills returned as she began piecing together a simple pattern. The work absorbed her, helping the lonely hours pass. The first night alone was the hardest. Every creak of the settling logs made her start. But the fire burned steady, and the doors remained firmly barred. By the second day, she'd found a rhythm tending the fire, melting snow, for water, working on her quilt, between meals of dried meat and preserved berries. When Silas finally returned, his face was red with frostbite and his clothes stiff with ice. Lily helped him out of his frozen gear while he stamped, feeling back into his feet. The clerk signed, he said, pulling papers from inside his coat where they'd stayed dry. And Reverend Amos Caldwell agreed to hold a notarized copy until spring. He's a good man, understands what's at stake. Lily fed him hot tea with honey while he warmed by the fire. Did anyone ask about me? Silas shook his head. Town's quiet, too cold for gossip. He didn't mention the looks he'd gotten a half Lakota man filing papers about land rights and unborn children. Some battles didn't need telling. After Silas had eaten and rested, Lily retrieved something from beneath her bed. I made this, she said softly, holding out a carved wooden rattle while you were gone to say thank you. The rattle was simple, but lovingly shaped, smooth from hours of careful sanding. Silas turned it in his hands, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not just gratitude, but trust. Without a word, he stood and placed it on the mantel beside his mother's beaded medicine pouch. My mother would have liked you, he said quietly. She believed in seeing the strength in people before they saw it themselves. Lily blinked back, tears touched by the simple acceptance in his words. She returned to her quilting as Silas began preparing for bed. The familiar sounds of his evening routine filling the cabin with comfort once again. Neither of them noticed the lone figure on horseback watching from the tree line, barely visible in the gathering dusk. The rider sat motionless, observing the lamplit windows of Silas's cabin before turning his mount toward town. Inside, Lily added another square to her quilt while Silas checked the fire one last time. The treaty papers lay safely stored in his trunk, the first step toward securing their future. Time would tell if it would be enough. The wooden rattle cast long shadows on the mantel, a symbol of how far Lily had come from that frightened girl in the snow. She was creating now, building something new from cast-off pieces, much like Silas had done with his own life in these mountains. Much like they were doing together as the winter days counted down toward spring and all it would bring. 2 weeks passed in gentle routine, but winter's grip remained stubborn. Fresh snow fell daily, coating the mountain passes in thick white blankets. Inside Silas's cabin, Lily sat by the window working on her quilt while watching fat flakes drift past the glass. The crunch of hooves and snow broke the afternoon quiet. Silas moved to the window, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle above the door. Through the swirling white, a single rider approached, hunched against the cold. "Mail rider Silas," said, recognizing the leather post bag. He opened the door as the man dismounted, snow falling from his heavy coat. "Much obliged," the rider said, stamping his boots. "Name's Zeke Hollister. Route's gone longer than planned in this weather. Might I warm up a spell?" Silas hesitated, studying the man's wind-burned face. Finally, he stepped aside, though his shoulders remained tense. "Come in, then." Zeke's gaze swept the cabin's interior, lingering on Lily. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something darker. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "Well now, if it ain't Miss Bell. Heard tell you'd gone missing." He glanced at her swollen belly. "Though I reckon I know what happened to Colton Graves's bastard." The word hung in the air like smoke. Silas's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "You're welcome to warm yourself, Mr. Zeke. Nothing more." Lily's fingers clutched her quiltwork knuckles white. She'd known Zeke from town, one of the men who'd laughed behind their hands at her size, at her shame. Silas put coffee on to boil, keeping himself between Zeke and Lily. The male rider shed his coat, making himself comfortable by the fire. His eyes never stopped moving, taking in details. The native carvings, the legal papers visible on the table, the new rattle on the mantel. "Mighty domestic setup you got here," Zeke commented, accepting a tin cup of coffee. "Wouldn't have expected it from a half-breed mountain man." Silas ignored the jab, serving a simple supper of beans and cornbread. They ate in tense silence, broken only by the wind's moan and the scrape of spoons against tin. As Zeke finished his meal, he reached for his coat with exaggerated care. A folded paper slipped from the pocket landing near the hearth. "Oops," he said, making no move to retrieve it. "Clumsy me." Lily's heart stopped when she saw the familiar handwriting on the exposed corner. Nathaniel's elegant script was unmistakable. Silas picked up the letter, his expression unchanging as he handed it back, but not before both he and Lily glimpsed its contents. Mentions of land filings, and a cryptic reference to resolving a certain girl problem. "Much obliged for the hospitality," Zeke said, tucking the letter away with a knowing look. "Best get some sleep. Long ride tomorrow." Silas showed him to the barn, where a pile of clean hay offered bedding. Back inside, he barred the door and checked every window. Lily hadn't moved from her chair. He planned that she whispered, dropping the letter. "Graves sent him to find me." Silas nodded grimly, more than likely. He retrieved a rusted tobacco tin from a shelf and began gathering their important papers. The treaty documents, birth records, land claim forms. "We need to hide these." Together they pried up a floorboard near the back wall. Silas placed the tin in the hollow space beneath, then carefully replaced the board. No casual search would find it. "Try to sleep," he told Lily. "I'll keep watch." But sleep, when it came, brought no peace. In her dreams, Lily stood at the edge of a vast pit, one of Graves's mines. Black sludge bubbled up from its depths, reaching for her with tar-like fingers. She tried to run, but her swollen belly made her slow. The sludge caught her ankles, pulling her down into suffocating darkness. She woke with a cry, her nightdress soaked with sweat. Silas was there instantly, his strong hands steadying her shoulders. "He's hunting me," she sobbed, clutching Silas's shirt. "He'll take my baby. Use him to get the land. Or worse, make sure he's never born at all." "Shh," Silas soothed, holding her close. His heart ached at her terror, at the trembling of her shoulders. "He won't get you. Either of you. I swear it." When dawn's gray light finally crept through the windows, they found the barn empty. Zeke had slipped away before sunrise, leaving only hoofprints in the fresh snow. His message had been delivered. Silas checked the hidden tobacco tin, ensuring everything remained secure. Lily stood at the window, one hand pressed to her belly, watching the horizon where Zeke had vanished. Their sanctuary felt different now. The warm safety of the cabin had been pierced by the outside world's cruel intentions. Every shadow held threat. Every distant sound brought tension. "What do we do?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady. Silas joined her at the window, his weathered face set with determination. "We protect what's ours," he said simply. "The baby, the land, each other." He touched the wooden rattle on the mantle, symbol of their growing family. "The Creator didn't bring us together just to let graves tear us apart." Lily nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Zeke's tracks until they disappeared completely. But they knew he carried word of their location back to Colton Graves. The time of hiding was over. Now they would have to stand their ground. The morning after Zeke's visit brought a new urgency to their routine. Silas laid out his old Colt revolver on the kitchen table, carefully cleaning each part while explaining its workings to Lily. Her eyes widened at the weapon's dull gleam. "I've never touched a gun before," she admitted, hands folded in her lap. Silas nodded, understanding her hesitation. These days, knowing how might save your life, and the baby's. He assembled the revolver with practiced movements, each click and snap precise. "We'll start slow." Outside behind the cabin, where thick pines offered cover, Silas set up empty tin cans on a fallen log. The winter air bit at their faces as he showed Lily how to hold the revolver properly, his larger hands adjusting her grip. "Keep both eyes open," he instructed. "Breathe steady like when you're carving." Lily squeezed the trigger. The gun's kick surprised her, making her stumble backward. Silas steadied her with a gentle hand at her elbow. The shot went wide, disappearing into the snowbank. "It's so loud," she gasped, trembling. Again, Silas encouraged. "Fear gets smaller with practice." They worked at it through the morning. By the 10th shot, Lily managed to graze one of the cans, sending it spinning. Pride bloomed in her chest at Silas's approving nod. While she rested, Silas retrieved heavy iron bear traps from the barn. He demonstrated how to set them safely, placing them at strategic points around the cabin's perimeter. Some he concealed under fresh snow. Others he secured near likely approach paths. "We'll check them daily," he explained, marking each location on a rough map. "Any trigger will need investigating." Inside, they took inventory of their supplies. Silas began sketching out various routes to town, calculating distances, and safe stopping points for when the baby came. Lily watched him work, marveling at his thorough planning. "Could I—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "Could I ride with you to check the trap lines tomorrow? I should know the paths in case." Silas studied her face. "The terrain's rough, you sure?" Lily straightened in her chair. "I'm sure." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Silas helped Lily mount his sturdy paint horse, showing her how to grip the saddle horn without losing balance. Her extra weight made mounting awkward, but Silas never commented or rushed her. They rode single file through the snow-laden forest. Silas pointed out landmarks. A lightning struck pine, a distinctive boulder, the creek bend, where fish gathered in spring. Lily memorized each one, slowly building a mental map of their sanctuary. Near midday, they approached a small clearing. Silas dismounted, helping Lily down. A gentle rise crowned the space, marked by weathered stones and faded feathers tied to branches. Prayer bundles, old but carefully maintained, swayed in the winter breeze. Silas removed his hat, his breath visible in the cold air. Lily realized this was no ordinary marker. This was a grave. My mother, Silas said, quietly kneeling beside the mound. She taught me both medicines, the white man's herbs, and our people's sacred ways. He touched one of the stones. She would have liked you. Lily stood respectfully back as Silas spoke soft words in Lakota, his deep voice carrying on the wind. She thought of her own mother who had paid to have her cast out and felt tears freeze on her cheeks. When Silas finished his prayer, they checked the remaining trap lines in comfortable silence. The sun was setting as they returned to the cabin, the horses' hooves crunching through fresh powder. That evening, after a simple supper of venison stew, they sat before the fire. The familiar crack and pop of burning wood filled the air. Lily watched Silas carve a new piece of wood, a small cradle board she realized for the baby. Emotion welled up inside her, sudden and overwhelming. Everything this man had done, protecting her, teaching her, preparing for her child, as if it were his own, struck her anew. Without overthinking, she reached across the space between them and took his hand. Silas looked up surprised, but not pulling away. His palm was rough against hers, marked by years of work and weather. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning far more than just the day's ride. Silas brought her hand to his lips, pressing a single gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I am not owed," he said, simply echoing his words from that first night in the snow. Lily tightened her grip on his fingers. "I've never been treated like I was worth waiting for," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Until now." Silas's eyes met hers, dark and deep as mountain pools. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Instead, he kept hold of her hand as they watched the fire together. Outside, the constant mountain wind gradually stilled, as if nature itself was acknowledging this quiet moment of connection. They sat that way for a long time, hands clasped, hearts full. It wasn't the passionate romance of penny novels or the calculated courtships Lily had watched from the sidelines in town. This was something deeper, a love built on respect, on seeing the true worth in each other that others had missed or dismissed. The fire burned low, casting soft shadows on the cabin walls. Their joined hands rested between them, a bridge across loneliness, a promise of belonging. In that peaceful silence, Lily felt the baby move, as if adding his own blessing to this newfound tenderness between his protectors. The warm Chinook winds swept down from the mountains, bringing an unexpected thaw to the frozen landscape. Snow began melting in thick rivulets, creating miniature streams that carved paths through the remaining drifts. Silas stood on the cabin's porch, testing the air with experienced senses. "Weather's turning," he announced to Lily, who sat by the window, working on the last stitches of her patchwork quilt. "Spring's coming early this year." Inside the cabin, Silas began preparing for their journey to town. He checked and double-checked the mule cart's wheels, replacing a worn axle pin and greasing the bearings. Every preparation was methodical, driven by his growing awareness of Lily's advancing condition. "We'll need to leave soon," he said, storing dried meat and extra blankets beneath the cart's seat. "The road will be muddy but passable." On the second day of sunshine, as Silas was loading the last of their supplies, Lily's sharp intake of breath stopped him mid-motion. She stood in the doorway, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other gripping the doorframe until her knuckles turned white. "Silas," she whispered, fear threading through her voice. I think it's starting." He was at her side in 3 long strides, helping her back into the cabin. The contractions began slowly, gentle waves that made Lily pause and breathe deeply. Silas laid fresh blankets near the fire and helped her settle there. His movements calm despite the concern in his eyes. "Remember how we practiced?" he encouraged, demonstrating the breathing pattern he'd taught her, like the wind through pine needles, steady and strong. As the sun crossed the sky, Lily's labor intensified. The gentle waves became crushing surges that left her gasping. Silas never left her side, supporting her back when she needed to walk, wiping her brow with cool cloths, murmuring quiet encouragement in both English and Lakota. "I can't," Lily cried, as night fell, her face contorted in pain. "It hurts too much." "You can," Silas insisted, his voice firm but gentle. "You're stronger than you know. Breathe with me." The hours crawled by. Lily screamed until her throat was raw, clutching Silas's hand with desperate strength. When panic overtook her, leaving her hyperventilating and dizzy, Silas cradled her head in his large hands. "Look at me," he commanded softly. "Focus on my voice. You're not alone. I'm right here." Near dawn, after 24 grueling hours, Lily's exhausted body finally prepared to deliver. Silas positioned himself to help, his experienced hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. One more push, he encouraged, as Lily gathered her remaining strength. "The baby's almost here." With a final tremendous effort, Lily bore down. A new cry filled the cabin, strong and indignant, full of life and promise. Silas caught the squirming infant in gentle hands, quickly checking him over with practiced eyes. "A boy," he announced, voice thick with emotion, strong and perfect. He laid the newborn on Lily's chest, watching as mother and child met for the first time. The baby's eyes, when they briefly opened, were a striking shade of gray, like storm clouds gathering over mountain peaks. "Isaac," Lily whispered, touching her son's tiny face with trembling fingers. "His name is Isaac's son, Gray Bear." Tears rolled silently down Silas's weathered cheeks as he heard the name, his mother's family name, given to this new life. He moved to the water bucket, dipping a clean cloth in the melted snow. With profound reverence, he returned to mother and child. "May I?" he asked softly. Lily nodded, understanding his intention. Silas gently touched the damp cloth to the baby's forehead. His deep voice filled the cabin as he spoke first in Lakota, the sacred words of his mother's people flowing like water over stones. Without pause, he transitioned into the familiar cadence of the 23rd Psalm, the two traditions joining as naturally as streams flowing into the same river. The newly completed patchwork quilt, still bearing the warmth of Lily's months of work, became Isaac's first blanket. Silas wrapped him carefully, creating a secure bundle that immediately calmed the infant's fussy movements. Lily watched her exhausted face glowing with joy as Silas settled into his chair by the fire. He cradled Isaac with the natural ease of a man who had waited his whole life for this moment. The baby's tiny hand wrapped around one of Silas's fingers, and the hardened mountain man's face softened with wonder. The morning light streamed through the cabin's windows, casting a golden glow over the scene. In that moment, the weight of what they had accomplished settled over them. This child, born of pain and rejection, delivered in love and acceptance, represented more than just a new life. In his very existence, Isaac's son, Gray Bear, embodied the healing of ancient wounds, the bridge between two peoples, and the promise of justice long denied. Silas rocked slowly in his chair, humming a melody that blended a Lakota lullaby with an old hymn. Lily, fighting sleep despite her exhaustion, memorized every detail of the scene. The way Silas's strong hands held Isaac so tenderly, how the firelight caught the tears still drying on his cheeks, the perfect peace in her son's sleeping face. "Rest now," Silas told her, his voice gentle. "We're watching over you both." As Lily finally surrendered to sleep, the last thing she saw was Silas pressing a feather-light kiss to Isaac's forehead, his lips moving in silent prayer. Outside, the Chinook winds continued their work, melting away the old snow to make way for spring's new beginnings. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cabin floor as Silas carefully packed his leather satchel. 3 days had passed since Isaac's birth, and both mother and child were growing stronger. Silas folded the precious documents, the birth certificate, and treaty papers into oilcloth to protect them from dampness. "I reckon 4 days should do it," he said, buckling the satchel closed. "2 there, 2 back, if the weather holds." Lily sat in the rocking chair nursing Isaac beneath the patchwork quilt. Her face showed worry, despite her attempts to hide it. "What if something happens while you're gone?" Silas moved deliberately around the cabin, gathering supplies. He checked his pistol, then placed it back in its holster. "My rifle's staying here with you," he said, propping the Winchester against the wall near her chair. "It's already loaded. Remember what I taught you about the sights. Line up the front post with the notch." Lily recited, her voice soft but steady. "Squeeze slow, don't pull." Silas nodded, satisfied. He filled the water barrel to the brim and stacked enough firewood inside to last a week. The smoked meat hanging from the rafters would feed them well enough. He'd even managed to trade with a passing hunter for extra coffee and sugar. "Keep the doors barred at night," he instructed, pulling on his heavy coat. "If anyone comes calling, that ain't me. You know what to do." Lily nodded, holding Isaac closer. The baby made small snuffling sounds against her chest. His tiny fist curled around a loose thread from the quilt. Silas paused at the sight, his weathered face softening. He knelt beside the rocking chair and gently touched Isaac's dark hair. "You keep your mama safe, little one," he whispered. Then, looking up at Lily, he added, "The Lord didn't bring us this far to abandon us now." The morning was crisp and clear as Silas mounted his horse. Lily stood in the doorway, Isaac bundled against her chest, watching until he disappeared around the bend. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the mountain silence. 2 days passed slowly. Lily kept herself busy with small tasks, feeding the chickens, sweeping the cabin floor, singing softly to Isaac as she rocked him. But by the second sunset, an unsettling feeling began to grow in her chest. On the same day, miles away on the trail to town, Silas sensed trouble before he saw it. His horse's ears pricked forward, and the animal's steady gait became hesitant. The path ahead wound through a narrow ravine, its walls rising steep and shadowed. The first shot kicked up dirt near his horse's hooves. The second clipped his shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, the precious satchel still clutched in his hands. 2 men emerged from behind the rocks, rough-looking fellows with kerchiefs pulled up over their faces. Silas recognized the expensive leather of their gun belts. Graves's men. "Now ain't this interesting," the taller one drawled, keeping his pistol trained on Silas. "A half-breed carrying papers. Wonder what kind of important business that might be." Silas didn't waste breath responding. He rolled, drawing his pistol, but the second man's boot caught him in the ribs. The fight was brutal, but brief. Though Silas landed several solid punches, he was outnumbered. The men beat him methodically, their fists falling with practiced precision. When Silas finally lay still, blood streaming from his temple, the shorter man grabbed the satchel. He tore it open, scattering the carefully prepared documents into the dirt. "Looky here," he sneered, scanning the papers. "Birth certificate for one Isaac's son, Gray Bear. Treaty claims, land rights." He spat tobacco juice onto the pages. "Mr. Graves was right about this one." The taller man struck a match, touching it to the papers. They watched them burn, then turned their attention back to Silas's motionless form. "Ravines deep enough," the shorter one said. "Won't be found till spring thaw, if ever." They dragged Silas's body to the edge and pushed. He tumbled like a broken doll, disappearing into the shadows below. The men mounted up, leading Silas's horse away with them. Back at the cabin, 4 days had now passed with no word. Lily paced, checking the window so often that Isaac fussed at the constant movement. The worry that had started as a small seed in her chest had grown into full-blown fear. A knock at the door nearly made her drop the baby. She clutched Isaac tighter, one hand reaching for the rifle. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "It's Sadie Beth," a young voice answered. "From the Watson place, Ma sent some oats, seeing as you got a little one now." Lily cracked the door carefully. Sadie Bell Hawkins was a skinny girl of about 15, her freckled face familiar from occasional visits. She held out a burlap sack. "Much obliged," Lily said, accepting the oats. But something in Sadie Beth's expression made her pause. "What is it?" The girl shifted uncomfortably. "Heard some talk in town yesterday. 2 of Graves's men was bragging at the saloon." She twisted her apron in her hands. "Said they'd taken care of a trapper problem up in Crow's Ravine. Ma said I shouldn't tell you, but—" Lily's vision swam. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, feeling Isaac squirm against her chest. "You best get on home now," she managed to say. Sadie Beth nodded and hurried away, casting worried glances over her shoulder. Lily closed the door and slid the bar into place with trembling hands. She crossed to Silas's chair by the fire and sank into it, breathing in the lingering scent of leather and pipe smoke that clung to the fabric. "No," she whispered fiercely. "No, no, no." Isaac began to cry, his wails echoing off the cabin walls. Lily rocked him automatically, her mind racing. Silas couldn't be dead. He was too strong, too careful. He had promised to protect them. But as the day wore on and night fell, the terrible possibility became more real. If Silas was truly gone, she and Isaac were alone. Graves would come for them, next come for her son to erase the last evidence of his shame and secure his precious mining rights. Lily laid Isaac in his cradle and crossed to where Silas's rifle leaned against the wall. She picked it up, feeling its weight. Her hands remembered his lessons, how to check the chamber, how to sight along the barrel. Moving with deliberate care, she retrieved the revolver from its box and began to clean it just as Silas had shown her. Each click of metal on metal strengthened her resolve. She was no longer the helpless girl who had collapsed in the snow months ago. Silas had taught her more than just how to shoot. He had shown her she was worth fighting for. By midnight, Lily had positioned herself in Silas's chair rifle across her lap, revolver within easy reach. Isaac slept peacefully in his cradle beside her. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its cry hanging unanswered in the cold mountain air. "You were wrong about one thing, Silas," she whispered, touching the wooden rattle he had placed above the hearth. "The Lord didn't bring us this far just to abandon us. He brought us this far to make us strong." She settled deeper into the chair, her eyes fixed on the door, one hand resting protectively on Isaac's cradle. The night stretched ahead, long and uncertain, but Lily Mae Carson Graybear was ready to face whatever it might bring. The first rays of dawn painted the snow-capped peaks in shades of rose and gold. Lily secured the last bundle to Silas's old pack mule, her movements careful and practiced. Isaac slept against her chest, wrapped snugly in a sling she'd fashioned from her warmest shawl. She took one final look at the cabin that had become her sanctuary. The wooden rattle above the hearth caught the morning light, seeming to glow with an inner fire. Lily touched it briefly, drawing strength from the memory of Silas's steady hands, showing her how to carve. "Time to go, little one," she whispered to Isaac. The baby stirred, but didn't wake his breath warm against her collar. The trail down from the highlands had thawed enough for safe passage, though patches of ice still lurked in the shadows. Lily led the mule carefully, one hand on its bridle, the other supporting Isaac. Silas had taught her well. Test each step, watch the animal's ears, listen to the mountain's warnings. The morning wore on as they descended. Lily stopped often to adjust Isaac's wrappings or to let the mule rest. By midday, They reached the flatter ground where the agency post stood, a weathered building with a tin roof that gleamed dully in the winter sun. As she approached, the door opened. A tall man in a black coat emerged, his clerical collar visible even at a distance. Lily's heart leaped. This must be the preacher Silas had trusted with their precious documents. "Miss Bell," he called out, squinting against the glare. "I'm Reverend Amos Caldwell. Silas Boone spoke of you." Lily drew closer, studying his face. The preacher's eyes were kind, his expression open and honest. "You have the papers?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, glancing at Isaac. "Been holding them safe, waiting for word. When I heard rumors about Silas," he trailed off, pain crossing his features. "Well, I figured you might come this way eventually." Inside the post, Reverend Amos Caldwell poured her a cup of hot coffee, while the agency clerk's wife cooed over Isaac. The baby was awake now, his gray eyes taking in everything with quiet intensity. "Strong boy," the clerk's wife commented, touching his dark hair. "Looks like his daddy." Lily didn't correct her assumption about which man she meant. Instead, she sipped her coffee and watched as Reverend Amos Caldwell retrieved a leather folder from a locked drawer. "Everything's here," he said, spreading the documents on the rough wooden table. "Birth certificate, treaty, claims, water rights, all properly notarized." Silas was thorough. "He knew what was coming," Lily said softly. "He tried to protect us." The preacher's face hardened. "Graves's giving his big speech tomorrow, trying to rally support for that mining operation. Town's full of his supporters." He studied Lily carefully. "You sure you want to do this?" Lily touched Isaac's cheek, feeling his solid warmth. "Silas believed in justice," she said. "He believed in me. I aim to prove him right." Reverend Amos Caldwell nodded slowly. "Then I'll ride with you. My presence might help keep things civilized." They set out within the hour, the preacher on his own horse. Lily now properly mounted on the mule. The town was only 5 miles distant, but they took their time, saving the animal's strength. As they rode, Reverend Amos Caldwell told her about Silas's visits to his church, not to pray, but to discuss the treaties to ensure everything was legal and binding. He knew the law better than most lawyers, the preacher said, studied every word. Every precedent said it was his mother's legacy, using white man's papers to protect Indian lands. Lily thought of the careful way Silas had handled documents, the same reverence he showed to his mother's medicine pouch. Everything about him had been intentional, purposeful. The knowledge made her sit straighter in the saddle. Meanwhile, in town, Colton Graves paced his office in the mining company building. Late afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, catching the cut glass decanter on his desk. He'd already emptied it once today. "What do you mean she's still in the hills?" he demanded, rounding on his men, the same two who had ambushed Silas. "I thought this was handled." The taller man shifted uncomfortably. "Cabin's empty now, boss, but some folks saw her heading down with the baby preachers with her." Graves slammed his hand on the desk, making the empty decanter rattle. "Tomorrow's speech is crucial. The territorial governor will be there. Everything has to be perfect." He ran a hand through his carefully groomed hair. "Find her. Stop her. I don't care how." But beneath his bluster, something haunted moved in Graves's eyes. He went to the window, staring at the distant mountains. His men exchanged glances behind his back. "What about the half-breed's body?" Graves asked suddenly. "Any sign?" The shorter man spat into a brass cuspidor. "Ravine's deep, boss. Won't be found till spring, if ever." Graves nodded, but his reflection in the window looked pale. He'd never ordered a killing before. Property damage, intimidation, bribery. Those were gentlemen's crimes. But the thought of Silas Boone's broken body lying in that rocky grave made his hands shake. And now, Lily was coming. The girl he'd used and discarded carrying his son. The son he'd paid to have hidden away. The son who, if those treaty papers were real, could destroy everything he'd built. "Double the guards," he ordered. "Watch every road and get me another bottle." His men left boots echoing on the polished floors. Graves remained at the window, watching the sun sink behind the mountains that had sheltered Lily all these months, the same mountains that now held Silas Boone's secrets in their dark ravines. The sound of a baby's cry drifted up from the street, someone else's child, but it made him flinch. He thought of Lily as she'd been before, soft-spoken, easily led, desperate for any scrap of attention. But the reports from his men painted a different picture now. They spoke of a woman who carried a rifle with purpose, whose eyes held no fear. "What did that half-breed do to you?" Graves whispered to her absent ghost. The empty office gave no answer. As dusk gathered, Lily and Reverend Amos Caldwell made camp in a sheltered grove just outside town. They could see the lights beginning to twinkle in windows, hear the distant whistle of the evening train. Isaac nursed quietly while the preacher built a small fire. "We'll go in at first light," he said, handling her a tin cup of beans. "The governor's due on the morning train. Graves's speech is set for 10 o'clock. Lily nodded, shifting Isaac to her shoulder. The baby's weight was familiar, now grounding. She thought of all the nights Silas had sat with her by the fire, teaching her to read the treaties, explaining water rights and mineral claims. He'd known this moment might come. "Reverend," she said softly, "if something happens tomorrow—" "Nothing's going to happen," he interrupted firmly. "The law's on our side. The treaties are clear. And that boy you're holding—" he nodded at Isaac. "He's living proof of God's justice." Lily touched Isaac's dark hair, so like Silas's in texture. The baby smelled of milk and wood smoke and the sage Silas had tucked into his cradle. Every piece of him was a miracle, not ashamed to be hidden, but a bridge between worlds. She settled him in his sling and checked Silas's revolver one last time before lying down. Above them, stars pierced the darkening sky like silver nails. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called a lonely, questioning sound. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, Lily held her son close and let the familiar mountain air wash over them both. She was no longer the girl who had arrived in a snowstorm, lost and afraid. Silas had shown her a different way to be strong, purposeful, worthy of respect. As sleep began to take her, she whispered one of Silas's prayers into Isaac's hair. The words were, Lakota, the meaning clear. Protect us, guide us, make us brave. Morning sunlight glinted off the freshly painted storefronts as Lily guided Silas's mule down Main Street. Her skirts were dusty, her face weathered from the trail, but she sat straight in the saddle. Isaac slept peacefully against her chest, wrapped in the patchwork quilt she'd sewn during those long winter nights. The campaign rally had drawn most of the town. Bunting decorated the wooden platform erected outside the territorial courthouse, and a brass band played a jaunty tune. Ladies in fine dresses twirled parasols, while men in suitcoats passed cigars and discussed the promising future Colton Graves represented. Reverend Amos Caldwell rode slightly behind Lily, the leather folder, containing the treaties secure in his saddlebag. They could see Graves on the platform, resplendent in a black broadcloth suit. The territorial governor sat nearby in a cushioned chair, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief. Friends and citizens, Graves's voice rang out across the crowd. Today marks a new chapter in our territory's growth. With your support, we'll bring prosperity through progress. The clip-clop of Lily's mule drew heads as she approached. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Women who had once scorned her now stared in confusion at her transformed bearing. The local banker's daughter, Graves's intended bride, clutched her father's arm. Graves faltered mid-sentence as he spotted her. His face drained of color, but he quickly recovered. As I was saying, the mining operations will bring. This child is yours. Lily's voice cut through the morning air like a thunderclap, and he's the one thing you can't bury. The crowd gasped. The brass band stuttered to silence. Isaac stirred against Lily's chest, but didn't cry. Graves's laugh was sharp and false. This is ridiculous. Someone remove this woman. I'm not leaving. Lily's voice remained steady. You paid my mother to send me away, paid to hide your shame. But God had other plans. The governor leaned forward in his chair, suddenly alert. Graves's campaign manager whispered urgently in his ear, but he waved the man away. You're a liar, Graves snarled. Sheriff, arrest her for disturbing the peace. The sheriff stepped forward uncertainly, but Reverend Amos Caldwell spurred his horse closer. I have documents here properly notarized proving this child's parentage. He pulled the leather folder from his saddlebag. More importantly, I have treaties showing this boy's legal rights to the very land you're planning to mine. Another shockwave moved through the crowd. The governor stood adjusting his spectacles. What treaties are these? The Henderson Red Cloud Agreement of 1873. The preacher answered, specifically protecting the rights of mixed-blood descendants. This child, through his adoptive father's lineage, has legal claim to both water and mineral rights in the disputed territory. Graves's face had turned an ugly shade of purple. Adoptive father, you mean that half-breed trapper, the one who… He caught himself, but not before heads turned at his slip. The one your men attacked. Lily's voice carried clearly. The one they left for dead in a ravine. She shifted Isaac in her arms, displaying his features to the crowd. The resemblance to Graves was unmistakable. Silas Boone was more of a father in 3 months than you'll ever be. The governor was now studying Graves intently. These are serious allegations, Mr. Graves. If there are legitimate treaty claims, it's all lies, Graves shouted. He pointed at the sheriff again. Arrest her now, and that interfering preacher too. The sheriff took another hesitant step, but the crowd's mood had shifted. The banker's daughter had burst into tears. Several miners were muttering darkly about treaty rights. The governor's secretary was urgently flipping through a leather-bound law book. Lily sat calmly on her mule, Isaac now awake and quiet in her arms. The morning sun caught his gray eyes, eyes that held the same quiet strength she'd learned from Silas. She was no longer the shamed girl Graves had used and discarded. She was a mother protecting her son's birthright, carrying out Silas's final mission of justice. The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge as the sheriff looked between Graves's rage and Lily's unwavering certainty, trying to decide which way to turn. Stop. The command cut through the tension like a knife. Heads turned toward the crowd's edge, where a figure emerged, moving with painful determination. Silas Graybear's buckskin jacket was torn and bloodied, his face bruised, but his eyes burned with quiet intensity. The crowd parted before him like water. Dear God, the Reverend Amos Caldwell whispered. Lily's hands trembled on the reins. Silas. He limped forward, favoring his left leg. His weathered face bore fresh cuts, but the most damning evidence was the crude brand seared into his forearm, the same mark used on Graves' mine equipment. These men, Silas said, voice carrying across the suddenly silent square, ambushed me 3 days' ride north. He pointed to 2 rough-looking men trying to slip away through the crowd. The sheriff's deputies quickly blocked their escape. Graves's face had gone from purple to ash white. This is absurd. I don't know these men. They destroyed the treaty papers. Silas continued as if Graves hadn't spoken, said they were following orders to make sure nothing reached the territorial office. He pulled his shirt aside, revealing dark bruises across his ribs. They beat me, branded me like cattle, and left me for dead in Bear Creek Ravine. The governor's secretary had stopped flipping through his law book. The governor himself was staring hard at Graves, whose confident facade had cracked completely. But the Lord wasn't finished with me yet. Silas moved closer to Lily and the baby. A Ute hunting party found me treated my wounds. Their medicine woman recognized me from my mother's people. He reached up to touch Isaac's tiny hand. They helped me get back here to protect what matters. Miss Rose Woodbury, the town's schoolmarm, stepped forward from the crowd. Her spine was straight as a ruler, her voice clear and firm. I can verify the legitimacy of these treaty claims. I've studied the Henderson-Red Cloud Agreement extensively in my research on territorial law. Reverend Cyrus Barton, the eldest church leader, joined her, and I can speak to Mr. Graybear's character. He served as interpreter and peacemaker between settlers and tribes for years. His word is iron. Other church elders nodded in agreement. The crowd's mood had shifted decisively. Where before there had been uncertainty, now there was growing anger. Not at Lily and Silas, but at the man on the platform who had tried to bury truth under power. Sheriff Graves tried one last time, his voice cracking. These people are disrupting. No. Sheriff Virgil Kane lowered his gun, completely holstering it with deliberate care. We won't be tools for this kind of power. He turned to his deputies. Take those two men into custody. We'll hear their full testimony about the attack on Mr. Graybear. The governor stood straightening his coat. Mr. Graves, I believe we need to have a serious discussion about mining rights treaty violations and attempted murder. He gestured to his secretary. Please fetch Judge Jedediah Harper. We'll need sworn statements from all parties. Silas had reached Lily's mule. She slid down carefully, still holding Isaac, and Silas wrapped them both in his arms. The baby cooed, reaching for Silas's bearded face with perfect trust. I thought Lily's voice broke. We thought you were... Hush now, Silas murmured. The Creator wasn't done with this story yet. He touched Isaac's cheek gently. Our son needed both his parents to stand for his birthright. The crowd had begun to disperse, but not in the angry rush of a mob. Instead, people moved with the solemn purpose of citizens who had witnessed justice reassert itself over corruption. The sheriff's deputies led away Graves's men. The governor's secretary hurried toward the judge's office, and Colton Graves stood alone on his campaign platform, his dreams of power crumbling like sand. Miss Woodbury approached with a warm smile. Mr. Graybear, Mrs. Graybear, let's get you both inside the schoolhouse. You can rest there while the judge reviews your case. She touched Isaac's quilted blanket. Your son deserves to be comfortable while his rights are properly recorded. Spring sunshine warmed the courthouse steps as Judge Jedediah Harper read his final ruling. The morning dew still clung to the grass, and birds called from the cottonwoods lining the town square. A crowd had gathered to witness justice being served. In light of the evidence presented, including sworn testimonies and documented assault, I hereby remove Colton Graves from the mayoral ballot, the judge declared, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Furthermore, all mining claims on treaty-protected lands are hereby voided, effective immediately. Silas stood straight, despite his healing injuries, one hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. Isaac slept peacefully in her arms, wrapped in his patchwork quilt. The territorial clerk stepped forward with fresh documents. The birth certificate and treaty rights for Isaac's son Graybear have been properly filed and recorded. He smiled, something rare for the usually stern man. That land can never be touched by mining interests again. It's his birthright, guaranteed by both territorial and federal law. Governor Reverend cleared his throat. In recognition of Mr. Graybear's service as an interpreter and Mrs. Graybear's courage in upholding the law, the territory wishes to offer you a land grant." He gestured to a map spread on a nearby table. 40 acres of good bottom land near Crystal Creek, plus a modest stipend to establish a working farm. We need more bridge builders in this territory. Lily's eyes welled with tears. "Our own land," Silas squeezed her shoulder. "The Lord provides," he said softly. Reverend Cyrus Barton stepped forward from the crowd. "The church council met last night," he announced. "We voted unanimously to open our doors to all families in the territory, settler and native alike." He looked directly at Silas. "Your mother's people should never have been turned away. We aim to make that right. And there's more." Ms. Woodbury added, her face bright with purpose. "The agency clerk and I are establishing a new school. We'll teach both English and Lakota children together side by side. No more separation." The agency clerk nodded. "It's time our children learn from each other. The future belongs to all of them." Lily watched as Colton Graves was led away by deputies headed for questioning about his role in Silas's assault. There was no triumph in her heart, only relief that justice had prevailed without bloodshed. 2 weeks later, on a clear morning, Lily stood on the sacred ridge where Silas's mother was buried. She wore a dress sewn by the church ladies with beadwork gifted by Silas's Lakota cousins. Isaac, growing stronger every day, was wrapped in a new cradle board decorated with symbols of both his heritages. The ridge overlooked 2 gatherings below. On one side, settler families from town had spread blankets on the grass. On the other, members of Silas's mother's band sat in family groups, their horses grazing peacefully nearby. Children from both communities played together in the spring sunshine. Silas stood between Lily and the tribal elder who had helped save his life. The old man raised his hands to the sky and began the blessing in Lakota. Reverend Cyrus Barton followed with a prayer in English. The words were different, but the spirit of hope was the same. "This child," the elder proclaimed in careful English, "belongs to both nations. Through him we become one family under the same sky." Isaac chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, causing ripples of gentle laughter from both groups. The sound of shared joy echoed across the ridge. Lily looked out over the gathering, seeing not 2 separate peoples, but the beginning of something new. The church ladies were sharing food with native mothers. The agency clerk was discussing school plans with tribal teachers. Children played games together, teaching each other words in both languages. Silas took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "See there," he said softly. "The Creator's plan was bigger than just us." Lily nodded, watching Isaac reach for a butterfly that had landed on his cradle board. He knew what he was doing all along. The morning sun climbed higher, casting its light equally on all gathered below. 2 peoples, 1 future, bound together by a child born of both worlds. Just as the spring brought new life to the land, so too had truth, and justice brought new hope to their corner of the territory. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the newly planted fields of the Gray Bear farm. Spring had transformed the land, painting the meadows with splashes of purple lupine and golden prairie sunflowers. The fresh-cut posts of the split-rail fence stretched toward the creek, where willows dipped their new leaves in the clear water. On the wide farmhouse porch, Lily sat in the hand-carved rocking chair Silas had made during the winter. The gentle creaking of wooden runners kept time with her movements as she cradled Isaac, now 3 months old. His gray eyes followed the dance of dust motes in the warm light, his tiny fingers reaching up to touch the air. Inside the house, children's laughter rang out like wind chimes. The Wilson twins from town and 2 of Silas's young cousins were playing a game with dried corn kernels and painted stones, teaching each other words in both languages. Their voices carried through the open windows, mixing with the sweet scent of fresh-baked bread cooling on the kitchen windowsill. Silas worked at the far corner of the yard, his steady movements familiar and sure as he tamped down earth around a new fence post. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the fading scars from his winter ordeal. Yet there was no bitterness in his bearing, only the quiet contentment of a man at peace with his place in the world. Lily reached for the wooden rattle that rested on the small table beside her chair, the one she had carved during those uncertain days in the line shack when she first began to believe in possibilities. She laid it gently across Isaac's round belly, smiling as his eyes widened at the soft rattling sound it made when he kicked his feet. The melody of Amazing Grace rose naturally to her lips, and she began to hum, rocking in time with the ancient rhythm. The hymn drifted across the yard, carried by the spring breeze. Silas looked up from his work tools, forgotten in his hands. He crossed the yard with measured steps, boots leaving prints in the soft earth. Climbing the porch steps, he settled beside Lily's rocker, his presence solid and reassuring. Together they watched Isaac wave his chubby fists at the rattle, his face bright with discovery. "I prayed for a son and a woman of strength," Silas said softly, his voice rich with gratitude. "The Lord gave me both." Lily's eyes met his, remembering that first night in the snowstorm, when a stranger's quiet declaration had changed the course of her life. "By spring, you said." She smiled, touching Silas's weathered hand. "And here we are." The children's game ended in a burst of giggles, and they spilled out onto the porch, their faces flushed with play. They gathered around the rocker, eager to see baby Isaac. The Wilson girl reached out to touch his soft cheek, while Silas's young cousin whispered a traditional blessing in Lakota. Silas stood and gently lifted Isaac from Lily's arms. With reverence, he raised the child toward the deepening blue of the spring sky. Isaac's delighted squeal scattered a flock of meadowlarks from their perch on the newly mended fence. The birds took wing across the field, their flight path cutting through drifting clouds and endless possibilities. The wildflowers nodded their heads in the afternoon breeze, painting the land in nature's own patchwork quilt of colors. Like the varied threads that had brought their family together, each bloom added its own beauty to the whole. The sun caught the silver in Silas's hair and the joy in Lily's eyes as they stood together. Their son held high in the promise of spring. Living proof that love could bridge any distance, heal any wound, and build something new from broken pieces. Here was their victory, not in the defeat of enemies or the winning of battles, but in the simple grace of a family made whole. Their scars were not forgotten, but honored, woven into the fabric of who they had become, and their future stretched before them, like the endless Colorado sky, as wide and deep as hope itself. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.